Throne and Liberty is a tap target MMO, and its combat system is in the beginning slow and static, like a classical World of Warcraft, but this changes drastically throughout your character progression, and one of the ingredients for that change is the blocking system, which will be the focus of today's session. And with that, welcome to the third episode of the starter series for Throne and Liberty. In today's session we are trying to completely understand how blocking works in Throne and Liberty. We will talk about the general basics of blocking, then we need to understand what Fury and Breath attacks are, and at last how it impacts your stamina bar. Okay, so let's start to understand what the blocking system is. You might know from other games that you have a stamina bar, with which you can do dodges or blocks to be invincible to all incoming attacks in this moment, so-called iframes. That's exactly the same in Throne and Liberty. So first we have to understand that we have two different types of blocks. We have a stand block and a movement block, or a roll block, how I like to call them. In the stand block you are staying on your current position and blocking all incoming attacks. In the roll block you are making a roll and blocking in the animation of the roll all incoming attacks. To activate your stand block you just simply press your block button, which is by default the Q key. To activate the roll block you press your block button while you are in movement. Generally the roll block has less iframes than a stand block, but each weapon has different block animations, which might come also with slightly different iframes. So when you are doing your layout for all of your active and your passive spells, you also have to define with which weapon you want to block. It always defines your stand block and your roll block. These come also with a bunch of effects, which we come later again to, because first of all we have to understand another system, and these are the special attacks, so-called Fury and Breath attacks. So both of those attacks are in PvP and in PvE. To understand these now we will first have a look on PvE and then on PvP, because that just makes it easier to understand. So Fury attacks are in PvE always signaled with a pink round marker. In the open world and in lower dungeons these cycles will get smaller and smaller, signaling you when you have to block. In harder dungeons these won't be there anymore. You can block these either with a stand block or a roll block. You will have those in a lot of different dungeons, and of course they have also different timings. So sometimes the pink circle appears and you have to block after 2 or 3 seconds, and sometimes after 1 second, and so on. But important here for the Fury attacks is that you can block them with both blocks, either a roll block or a stand block. But the timing with the roll block is just a little harder, because you don't have so many iframes in the roll block. Okay, but let's come to the next attacks, the so-called Breath attacks. In PvE you will see a pink square getting smaller and smaller, signaling you again when you have to block. But these you have to block with a roll block, and you can't block them with a stand block. In PvE you won't have them at the beginning. On global release those you probably won't see in the first months in any dungeons. These come then later in the harder dungeons. In the endgame, boss fights will always have them both type of attacks. That brings then always a nice dynamic into the endgame boss fights. Okay, but in addition you can block those attacks good or bad. So if you block really early, then it will say defense. And if you block just in time, then it will say perfect. And now we can understand what our additional effects from each weapon blocks brings. Because you will get different effects depending if you block perfectly or just normal. So as an example, if you block perfectly with the dagger's roll block, you get invisibility for 3 seconds. On the other hand, if you block with the bow's roll block, you get an additional dash, and so on. Each weapon has here different effects. So now what does it mean for PvP? Here we have also Fury attacks and Breath attacks. It's always mentioned in the description. Usually most of the CC spells are Fury attacks and just a few of those are actually Breath attacks. Obviously you don't see those pink circles in PvP. Here you have to anticipate what your opponent is doing. So if you think your opponent is doing a Fury attack, you might go into a stand block. So you block his stun or his silence or whatever. But if your opponent sees that you're doing a stand block, he might go into a Breath attack, and so on. But combat in the late game is really fast, so you can't always rely on that. It's a lot of prediction what your opponent is doing. In large scale PvP it's also just more important that you understand the basics, that you can block incoming attacks with your blocks. And also not all the weapons have Breath attacks right now, but this will change probably in the future, so it's good to get a good understanding about the basics. Now we just have to discuss one last point, and that's stamina costs. So for blocking, you always need at least 35% of your stamina to initiate the block. That doesn't matter if it's a stand block or roll block. But your stamina will always refill constantly, at least if you are not in a morph. If your stamina is below 35%, you also have a marker on your stamina bar to see when you actually can block again. So there's just one more important thing that you need to know when it comes to blocking and your stamina. If you are getting damage in your block, that also consumes additional stamina. So if you're actually blocking a lot of damage, then your stamina might be fully consumed by that. But your block is never being cancelled by that. So even if you have no stamina anymore, it will always block all attacks until your block animation is done. Okay, that's it, all you need to know about blocking. I hope that video was helpful and you could learn something. Don't forget to subscribe and like, and see you soon in the next one.